Nora heard the word divorce, and suddenly, nothing else mattered. She left the table without a word. Every night, the same voices through the wall. They waited until they thought she was asleep. But walls are thin, and children hear everything. Every child of every argument knows this moment. Hands on ears, eyes shut tight, hoping that if you can't hear it, maybe it isn't real. She only wanted to print her homework. Instead, she found a file she was never meant to see. Divorce agreement. Hearing it was one thing. Seeing it in writing was another. 100 questions. No answers. Where will I live? Who will I stay with? Will they still love me the same? A single tear fell on an old photograph. Her parents, a park, a perfect day. They didn't need a lawyer. They needed to remember. It was a Tuesday night when everything finally broke. Rose and Arthur had been married for 12 years. 12 years of birthdays, road trips, inside jokes. And lately, 12 months of something else. Something colder. They didn't even notice Nora standing in the doorway. That's the thing about a home falling apart. The people inside it stop seeing what matters most. I just need some space, Arthur said, reaching for the door. But Nora got there first. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just held his arm and asked one question. Daddy, were you even going to say goodbye? He stopped, because some questions hit harder than any argument ever could. That night, he stayed. But everyone in that house knew. Staying isn't the same as coming back. He stayed, but not really. That night, Arthur slept on the couch, the same couch where they used to watch movies until 2 in the morning. Behind that closed door, Rose stared at the ceiling, 12 feet apart. It might as well have been 12 miles. Around midnight, Nora came down for a glass of water. Found her dad asleep on the couch, still in his sweater, one arm hanging off the edge. She stood there for a while, just watching him. Biggest, strongest man she knew, sleeping like a guest in his own house. She thought about waking him up, telling him to go to bed, telling him everything she'd heard, everything she knew. Didn't. Just pulled the blanket up over his shoulder and went back upstairs. He never knew she was there. The next morning, they shared the same kitchen like two strangers sharing a bus stop. No good morning, no eye contact, just the sound of coffee being poured. But Nora noticed something they didn't. On the fridge, behind a grocery list, a photo from the zoo 6 years ago. Everyone was laughing in it. When was the last time she heard them laugh? At school, Mrs. Patterson noticed it right away. Nora, the girl who always raised her hand, hadn't written a single word all morning. Nora, is everything okay at home? Nora looked up, forced a smile, and told her first real lie. Yes, everything's fine. Some kids fail math. Nora was failing at pretending. When she came home from school, the house was empty. No note on the counter. No, how was your day? Mom was working late. Dad was somewhere. Nora stood in the doorway and listened to the silence. Funny thing about silence, it can be the loudest sound in the world. She sat by the window for a long time, watching the street. And somewhere between the sadness and the silence, a thought appeared. Small at first, then louder. If they won't fix this, maybe I have to. Crazy, maybe. But sometimes the smallest person in the house is the only one who can still see clearly. So she took out her notebook, the one with the bent corner, and wrote 2 words at the top of the page. The plan. Step 1. Get them to the park, the one from the photograph. Step 2. The restaurant where Dad proposed. Could a 10-year-old really save a marriage? Probably not. But Nora wasn't planning on probably. That afternoon, Nora spread every old photo across her bedroom floor. And she noticed something. In every single picture, they were touching, holding hands, leaning on each other, laughing at jokes nobody else could hear. These weren't two people who fell out of love. These were two people who forgot they were in it. That evening, Nora didn't ask permission. She just sat down next to her mother and opened the old album. "Mom, where did you and Dad meet?" Rose froze for a second. Then something in her face softened. "A park. A sunny Sunday morning. I was reading, and this clumsy man tripped right over my picnic blanket. And for the first time in months." Rose smiled. Nora just listened and remembered every word. That night, after Nora went to bed, Rose pulled an old shoebox down from the closet shelf. Hadn't opened it in years. The wedding photo was sitting right on top. Two kids in that picture, really. She was 26. Arthur was 28 and wearing a suit he'd borrowed from his cousin because they couldn't afford to buy one. Nobody at the wedding knew that. Well, everybody probably knew that. Their first apartment was above a bakery. Tiny place. Smelled like bread every morning at 5. Whether you wanted it to or not. The heater died their first winter there, and the landlord took 9 days to fix it. 9 days. They slept in their coats and ate soup for dinner, and somehow she remembered that week as one of the happiest of her life. Slept in coats and laughed the whole time. Now there was a real house. 2 cars in the driveway. A daughter sleeping down the hall. And they couldn't get through breakfast without the room going cold. She sat on the edge of the bed with that photo for a long while, trying to find the exact moment it all started slipping. Couldn't. There wasn't one. Just a lot of little ones, stacked up quiet over the years. A missed dinner, a call that got cut short, a good night that turned into nothing at all. Her eyes stung. She let them. Then she put the photo back in the box, but not at the bottom where it had been. On top, where she could find it again. The next morning, Rose walked into the kitchen and stopped. Nora was standing there, holding out a small folded note. Purple marker. Little hearts all over it, and one slightly crooked sun. "You are invited. Saturday. 10 a.m. Miller Park. Dress nice. No questions allowed." She read it twice, then a third time. "Nora, what is this?" Nora took a step back, hands behind her back now, wearing the most innocent face a 10-year-old has ever managed. "It's a surprise, Mom. You have to come. It's the rules." "Whose rules?" "My rules." And then it happened. Rose laughed. A real one. The kind Nora hadn't heard in months, the kind that used to fill the whole house. Okay. Saturday. Miller Park?" She had no idea she'd just said yes to the most important appointment of her life. That was the easy part. Now she had to get her dad there too. Nora closed her bedroom door and called him. "Dad, are you busy Saturday morning?" "Saturday? I'm not sure, sweetheart. Why?" "There's a school project about family history. I need you to come. It's important." It wasn't exactly true. But Nora figured some lies are different. The ones you tell because you're trying to fix something. Her dad went quiet for a while. She could hear him breathing, thinking. She squeezed the phone and waited. "Please, Daddy. Miller Park, 10 o'clock. Promise?" Another pause, then finally, "Okay, I promise." She hung up and sat on her bed for a minute, heart pounding. Both of them said yes. Neither of them knew the other one was coming. Now all she could do was wait for Saturday. Saturday turned out sunny, which felt like a good sign. Rose and Nora walked through the park gates a little after 10. "So, where's this project happening?" "Just keep walking, Mom." About halfway down the path, Rose started slowing down. She was looking at the old oak tree, then at the wooden bench under it. Then she stopped completely. "Nora, I know this place." "You do?" "This is where I met your father. That bench right there. I was reading and he tripped over my blanket and spilled lemonade all over my book." She laughed a little, remembering it. Then the laugh faded and something else came into her face. Something quieter. "Why did you bring me here?" Nora didn't answer. She was looking past her mother, at the man walking toward them from the other side of the park. Arthur walked up the path slowly, and with every step, the place came back to him. The oak tree, the bench. He hadn't been here in 12 years, but his feet seemed to remember the way on their own. Rose turned around before he could say anything. For a moment, nobody spoke. "You're here for a school project too?" she finally asked. Arthur looked down at Nora, who was suddenly very interested in her shoes. "Apparently," he said, "family history." "Family history," Rose repeated, and they both looked at their daughter, who shrugged like none of this was her doing. Arthur turned to the bench. "Is that—" "Yeah," Rose said quietly. "It is." He smiled a little. "You were reading. I was carrying lemonade. You were tripping mostly." And there it was, small, careful, but real. The first conversation in months that didn't end in a slammed door. At some point, the talking just stopped. Arthur said something about the lemonade. Rose shook her head, laughing. Then neither of them said anything. And then he just stepped forward and put his arms around her. She didn't pull away, leaned into his shoulder, closed her eyes. They stood there under that old tree while the morning went on around them like nothing special was happening. An older couple walked past with their dog and smiled. Had no idea what they were actually looking at. 8 months of slammed doors and cold mornings, finally letting go. Rose said something into his sweater. Too quiet for anyone else to hear. Arthur held her a little tighter after that. Must have been good. Nora stood off to the side and watched the whole thing. Hands pressed together, not daring to make a sound. Her plan wasn't done yet. But it was working. It was actually working. The park turned into a walk somehow. Nobody decided it. They just kept going. And the old stories kept coming. Then Nora announced she was starving. Said it twice. Loud both times. Wasn't taking any chances. Arthur mentioned a little Italian place nearby. Rose stopped and looked at him. "That place is still open?" "Still open. Same tables, same candles stuck in old wine bottles, same corner spot by the window. Even got their old table. Nobody planned that part. Just happened." Arthur sat there staring at a menu he clearly wasn't reading. Finally said the first time they ate here, he got so nervous he ordered pizza. Rose looked up at him. "At an Italian restaurant. The waiter stared at you forever." He did. Deserved it too. Both of them laughed. Same time, same memory. Nora sat in the middle and didn't move a muscle. Didn't touch her bread. Didn't dare. Whatever was happening at that table. She wasn't about to ruin it. The food came. Nobody really touched it. Too much being said at that table. Real things. The kind that had been waiting 8 months to come out. Arthur put his fork down at some point and went quiet, stared at the candle. Then he said it. Said he was the one who made those papers. Not because he wanted to leave, because he thought she'd be happier without him. He'd watched her get sadder and sadder for a year, and somewhere along the way decided he was the reason. "I thought I was the thing making you unhappy," he said. "I thought I was doing you a favor." Rose just stared at him. Took her a long time to answer. When she did, her voice was barely there. She hadn't pulled away because she stopped loving him. Pulled away because she was terrified of losing him. Every cold morning, every slammed door, fear the whole time, dressed up as anger. "I thought you were already gone," she said. "I was just trying to get there first." 8 months. 8 months of separate rooms over a misunderstanding. Nora sat between them, holding her breath. 10 years old, watching her parents finally say the things that should have been said last spring. Arthur reached across the table. Rose let him take her hand. Then Rose went quiet in the middle of a sentence. Rose's face changed. Color just left it. She pressed her hand to her forehead, said she felt strange, tried to laugh it off. Probably the wine. She hadn't ordered wine. She tried to stand, shouldn't have. Legs gave out halfway up, and Arthur moved faster than he'd moved in years. Caught her before she hit the floor, knocked his own chair over doing it. Whole restaurant went silent. Somebody yelled to call an ambulance. Waiter already dialing. Nora stood frozen by the table, watching her father hold her mother up, hearing him say her name over and over, telling her to stay with him. 5 minutes earlier, they'd been holding hands across the table. Now her mother couldn't stand, and all Nora could think was, "This was my plan. I brought them here. What did I do?" They got her into a chair. That part Nora barely remembered later. What she remembered was the sound of the restaurant, how fast it changed. Forks going quiet, chairs scraping back, somebody's phone already out, her dad's voice on the emergency line, steady on the outside. She knew him well enough to hear the shaking underneath. Yes, his wife, 41. She fainted. She's breathing. No history of this. Yes, he'd stay on the line. The waiter brought water, nobody drank. An older woman from the next table came over. Said she was a nurse, retired. Checked Rose's pulse with 2 fingers, calm as anything, and gave Arthur the words he needed. "She's okay. Help is coming. Keep her still." Nora knelt next to the chair the whole time, holding her mother's hand. Warm. She kept checking that. Warm meant okay. Warm meant still here. Her mom's eyes opened a little at some point. Found Nora. "Hey, baby." Barely a whisper. "Don't look so scared." Then the eyes drifted shut again, and Nora's heart forgot how to work for a second. Until the nurse said sleeping, just exhausted, that's all. Arthur knelt on the other side. Phone still to his ear, free hand brushing the hair from Rose's face. Gentle. Automatic. Like his hand remembered something the rest of him had spent 8 months trying to forget. "Stay with us, honey. You hear me? We just got things good again." Nora looked up at her father. He looked at her. Neither of them said the thing they were both thinking. That this couldn't happen now. Not now. Not after today. The park, the bench, the lemonade story, the laughing under the oak tree. 2 hours into being a family again. 2 hours. Somewhere outside, far away but getting closer, a siren. Arthur heard it first, closed his eyes for half a second. "They're here," he said into the phone. "Thank you. They're here." Red and blue light started sliding across the restaurant windows, across the candles, across her mother's pale face. Nora squeezed the warm hand one more time. "You're going to be okay, Mom," she whispered. "You have to be." She looked at her mother's face, still, quiet but breathing. "I'm not done fixing this family yet." Nora had never been inside an ambulance before. Always wondered about them, the way kids do. The lights, the sirens. Never once imagined her mother on the stretcher. The paramedic kept asking questions. When did she last eat? Any medical conditions? Any allergies? Any medications? And here's the thing. Arthur knew every answer. Didn't hesitate once. Knew she'd skipped lunch. Knew about the iron pills she took in the winter. Knew she was allergic to penicillin. Knew the exact year they found out. Knew which hospital. 8 months of not talking, and he still knew her by heart. The paramedic nodded along, writing it all down. Said her vitals looked stable. Said it like it was supposed to be comforting. Rose drifted in and out behind the oxygen mask. Every time her eyes opened, they found Arthur. Every single time. And every time, he was already looking back. He held her hand the whole ride. Both of his hands around her one. Like letting go wasn't something he was willing to try again. Nora sat across from them, buckled into the little seat, knees pulled up. Quiet. Too quiet. Inside her head, it was loud. The park was my idea. The restaurant was my idea. She walked all day because of me. Maybe if I hadn't... Nora. Her father's voice. He'd been watching her. He reached over with one hand, kept the other one on Rose, and squeezed her shoulder. "This is not your fault, sweetheart. You hear me? Whatever this is. Not your fault." She nodded. Didn't believe him. Nodded anyway. Outside, the city slid past the little back windows. Streetlights, gas stations, normal people having a normal night. Funny how the world just keeps going while yours stops. Then the ambulance slowed. Bright lights through the windows. Red letters somewhere above them. Emergency. The doors opened, and everything started moving very fast. The waiting room had 11 chairs. Nora counted them 4 times. Ceiling tiles, too. 48, if anyone's asking. Arthur couldn't sit. Stood, sat, stood again. Walked to the vending machine twice, bought nothing both times. Just needed somewhere to go. An hour like that. Maybe more. Hospital time moves different. Then a doctor came through the doors. "She's awake. She's stable. You can see her." But there was something in her face. Small smile she was clearly holding back. Like someone sitting on the best part of a story. "Actually, there's something she wants to tell you herself." They went in. Rose was sitting up in the bed. And the first thing Nora noticed, she didn't look sick. Tired, yes. Pale a little. But she was smiling. And she'd been crying. Both at the same time, somehow. One hand resting on her belly. "Arthur," she said, "sit down." "I'm fine standing. Sit down." He sat, and Rose told him. The dizziness, the exhaustion these past weeks, the fainting. None of it was something to be scared of. 2 months, the doctor said. 2 months along. A baby. Arthur didn't move for 5 full seconds. Just stared at her. Then his hand came up over his mouth and stayed there, and his eyes filled, and this man, who hadn't cried in front of anyone in years, lost the battle completely. "We're..." Couldn't finish it. "Yeah," Rose said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We are." Nora stood by the bed doing the math. A baby. Little brother or sister. Growing this whole time, through the fights, the cold mornings, the couch, the papers on the laptop screen, Through all of it, there was already one more of them. Arthur took Rose's hand, pressed it against his face, and just held it there. Nobody said anything about the divorce papers. Nobody ever would again. Some documents don't need to be deleted. They just stop existing on their own. And in the doorway, a 10-year-old girl in a red hoodie watched her family, her growing family, and smiled so hard her face hurt. Her plan worked, just not the way she planned it. Doctor's instructions were simple. Rest, real rest. Feet up, no heavy lifting, no stress. Rose lasted about a day and a half. Tuesday, she tried to do the dishes. Turned around to find Nora in the doorway, arms crossed, looking exactly like a very small security guard. "Mom, couch, now." "Nora, I'm pregnant, not broken." "Couch." End of argument. So Nora took over. 10 years old, running a household like she'd been doing it for decades. Made a chart. Of course she made a chart. Taped it to the fridge, right under the old family photo. Monday, vacuum. Tuesday, laundry. Wednesday, bathrooms. Wednesday got traded to Dad pretty fast. Some jobs need a grown-up, she explained. Mostly the gross ones. Vacuum was almost as tall as she was. Didn't matter. Wrestled it across every carpet twice a week, sweating, determined, refusing all offers of help. Laundry was a learning experience. Arthur's white shirt went in with her red hoodie. Came out the color of strawberry milk. He wore it to work anyway. Told everyone his daughter made it for him. Wore it twice more after that, just to make her laugh. Cooking. Well, there was an incident with scrambled eggs the family agreed never to discuss again. Smoke alarm still flinched when anyone walked past it. But she learned. Toast first, sandwiches. Then actual spaghetti. Sauce from a jar she'd picked out herself, after reading the back of every single option like a lawyer reviewing a contract. Cashier knew her by name now. Everyone on that street kinda did. Tea for her mom every afternoon, always too much sugar. Rose drank every cup without saying a word. Kept up with school, too. Homework at the kitchen table while dinner cooked. Spelling lists taped next to the chore chart. Her teacher noticed. Same girl who couldn't write a word last autumn, now first one done, hand always up. Funny what happens to a kid when home stops hurting. Arthur did his part. Home earlier. Cooked weekends. Rubbed Rose's feet during the evening news while Nora did homework on the floor beside them. The house felt different. Not because it was cleaner, wasn't, honestly. Corners the vacuum never quite reached. Towels folded in shapes no towel had ever been folded before. Different because of the sound. Noise in it again. Footsteps. Bad singing from the kitchen. A 10-year-old yelling at a vacuum cleaner. Home doing what homes are supposed to do. Every evening, Rose sat on that couch, hand on her belly, watching her little girl take care of everyone, and thought to herself, this baby is being born into a good house. Loud, slightly burnt, but good. Guest room became the nursery in March. Arthur came home one Saturday with paint cans, brushes, rollers, and absolutely no plan. Picked the color in the store in about 40 seconds. Soft yellow. Works for a boy or a girl, he said, very proud of himself. Rose pointed out they could just ask the doctor and know for certain. Arthur said, where's the fun in that? Whole debate at dinner. Rose wanted to know. Arthur wanted the surprise. Nora got the deciding vote. Went with her dad. Partly because she liked surprises, and partly because she'd already decided it was a girl and didn't need a doctor to confirm it. She'd had a feeling since February. Kept telling everyone about the feeling. Painting took all weekend. Should have taken an afternoon. First, they had to empty the room, which meant finding out what was actually in it. 12 years of stuff, old textbooks, a guitar Arthur swore he was going to learn someday. 3 boxes labeled MISC. Nobody had opened since the move. Half of Saturday went to just sitting on the floor, going through it all, laughing at things they'd forgotten they owned. Then the actual painting. Arthur got more on himself than on the wall. Yellow streak on his cheek that survived 3 showers. Nobody told him the first day. Family vote? He found out at work Monday. Nora claimed the bottom corner of the big wall and painted a little sun. Took her over an hour. Came out crooked, one ray way longer than the others. Everyone agreed it was the best thing in the room. Rose said they should pay her for it. Nora said she accepted ice cream. Rose wasn't allowed to do any of it. Paint fumes, ladders, lifting, all forbidden. So she appointed herself supervisor. Stood in the doorway with lemonade, pointing at spots they'd missed, enjoying the power a little too much. You missed a spot. Where? Everywhere, kinda. Crib came the weekend after. Arthur and the instruction manual did not get along. 4 screws left over at the end. Nobody knew where they belonged. So he took the whole thing apart and built it again. Then once more, just to be safe. By the end, he could have built one blindfolded, and said so loudly to anyone who'd listen. When it was finally done, the 3 of them stood in the doorway together. Yellow walls, white crib, crooked sun in the corner with one long ray. Nobody mentioned that less than a year ago, in this same house, there'd been divorce papers on a laptop. They all knew it anyway. You could feel everyone thinking it at the same time. Rose just reached over and took Arthur's hand, the one with yellow paint still under the fingernails. And they stood there a while longer, looking at the room where the next part of their life was going to sleep. The call came on a Thursday, 4:40 in the morning. Nora woke up to her dad gently shaking her shoulder, already dressed, car keys in his hand, saying the words she'd been waiting 6 months to hear. It's time, kiddo. She'd planned for this. Bag packed by the door for 2 weeks. Snacks, a book, phone charger, her lucky red hoodie laid out on the chair every night just in case. Forgot all of it, except the hoodie. They were in the car in 4 minutes. The drive was quiet and fast and slightly illegal. Arthur hit every green light in town, which he later described as a sign. Rose, between breaths, told him a sign of what? Watch the road. Even half doubled over, she was still managing him. He held her hand at the red lights and let go to shift gears, and Nora sat in the back watching her parents' hands find each other over and over, all the way to the hospital. Then the waiting. The longest part. Hospital chairs that were designed, Nora was pretty sure, by someone who hated sitting. Hot chocolate from a vending machine that took her $1 twice. A TV in the corner playing the morning news with no sound. Her dad couldn't sit still. Walked the same stretch of hallway so many times, Nora started counting laps. 41. She counted the ceiling tiles too, and the chairs, and how many people walked past in scrubs. Numbers were calming. Numbers behaved. An older man waiting across from them, there for his first grandchild, he said, talked to Arthur for a while about nothing in particular. Weather, traffic. At some point he looked over at Nora and said, "Big sister, huh?" And she nodded, and he smiled like he knew something. Best job in the world. I had 4 of them bossing me around. Then somewhere around lunchtime, a nurse came through the doors smiling, and everything else stopped mattering. A girl, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Loud, the nurse said. Very loud. Healthy. They named her Lily. Rose had wanted the name since she was a girl herself, saving it all these years like something put away in a box. Arthur heard it once and never suggested anything else. When Nora walked into that room, her mom was propped up in the bed, looking exhausted and happy all the way through, both at once. And her dad was in the chair by the window, holding something impossibly small wrapped in a white blanket. He wasn't saying anything. Big, strong Arthur, the man who fixed cars and carried furniture up the stairs alone, sitting there completely undone by 7 pounds of sleeping baby. Come here, he said quietly. Come meet your sister. Nora leaned against his shoulder and looked down. Tiny face, tiny fists, a little frown, like she was already unimpressed with everyone in the room. She's so small, Nora whispered. You were smaller, her dad said. Terrifying. And then he did something Nora didn't expect. He wrapped his free arm around her and pulled her in close, so he was holding both of them at once, the new daughter and the first one. And he pressed his face into Nora's hair and said, so quiet only she could hear it, none of this happens without you. You know that, right? Nora didn't answer. Couldn't have if she tried. From the bed, Rose watched the three of them squeezed into one chair by the hospital window, her whole world in one place, and started laughing and crying at the same time, the way you do when there's too much good and nowhere to put it. They brought Lily home on a Sunday. Nora had spent the whole morning getting ready. Cleaned the living room twice, arranged the couch pillows, moved them back. Then stood at the window for an hour watching for the car. When it finally pulled in, she had the front door open before her dad cut the engine. First day with a newborn, it turns out, is mostly quiet. Lots of whispering, lots of standing around the little basket just looking. The three of them kept catching each other doing it. Then, in the afternoon, Rose asked the question Nora had been waiting for. Do you want to hold her? Nora sat down on the couch first, very straight. Arranged her arms the way the nurse had shown her at the hospital, like she'd been studying for an exam, which she had, sort of. Watched 4 videos about it. Okay, ready. Rose lowered the baby into her arms, kept one hand under just in case, then slowly, let go. And there she was, 7 pounds of little sister, asleep. Nora didn't move, barely breathed. Lily's whole hand wrapped around one of her fingers, the way babies do, and held on. She's holding my finger, Nora whispered. Mom, she's holding my finger. She knows who you are. Arthur leaned over the back of the couch, watching the two of them. Rose leaned into his side. Nobody in that living room said anything for a long moment. Didn't seem to be anything that needed saying. Later, when Lily finally woke up and announced it to the whole neighborhood, the nurse hadn't lied about the lungs. Nora walked her up and down the hallway, bouncing her gently, telling her important thing. Which room was whose, what the dog next door was called, that the crooked sun on her wall was hand-painted by an artist, and the long ray was on purpose. Lily cried through most of it. Nora kept talking anyway. Little sisters have a lot to learn. 3 years later, same park, same bench. They come back every spring now. Sandwiches, lemonade, all 4 of them. Lily is 3 and runs everywhere she goes, and her favorite person in the world is her big sister. Before they leave, they take the picture. Same spot every year. At home it goes in the box, right on top of the wedding photo. Nobody ever opened that file on the laptop again. Every story has a secret. This family's was a 10-year-old girl in a red hoodie